convene formally a community contact meeting with Mayor Tony, Richmond City Councilors and school boards. I'm Thad Williamson from the Mayor's office. Before we get started, if anyone has information services, Mr. Ayad from RPS is here and is available, so please notify him. So we have a packed agenda. We're going to try to jump right into it. As posted here, we have a quick review of the compact list. It's been a little bit of time since it was adopted. Then some updates from the mayor, city council president, and school board concerning appointments and assignments. An update from the children's cabinet that I will give, and an update from RPS news that Mr. Grant will give. Then we have some presentations from both city administration and RPS administration as it relates to finances and facilities. So if you go to the presentation today, thank you. And I'll keep this super quick, and we do have at least one very important newcomer with us, that's probably for his benefit as well. So just to summarize all the discussion that we had over the spring and summer that led us to this point, I think there's a recognition that we all, as members of the public, and especially elected officials, have a shared interest and a moral obligation to do everything that we can to support our children's education opportunities, no matter the challenges, no matter the difficulties that individual children may have. Doing so, especially in the context of high poverty, requires attention to both what's happening inside the classroom and outside the classroom in the larger community. And so to address these longstanding needs successfully in this context of limited resources requires collaboration in an ongoing way, and the Education Compact is designed to structure that collaboration over the remainder of its term. So go to the next slide. And this is briefly, well, it's not a day for a lot of data, at least on this piece, but obviously just these are some of the gaps we're talking about, the huge discrepancy in child poverty between the city of Richmond and the state, and likewise the significant difference in graduation rate according to official measure between the city and Richmond. What this is all about is trying to work to close both these gaps and others at the same time. So I'm sorry that the font is a little difficult here, but maybe there's a way to blow it up a little more. Go 200% or something.
How about right here? Is that clear?
Okay. All right. So the compact has sort of three parts to it. The first being the elected officials joint meetings every quarter to receive updates, to have dialogue on shared issues, and also to establish a shared basis for information. The second is what we're calling the RBA Children's Cabinet, which is that regular meeting of administrators for both the city and RPS, and that actually has been started already. And then still the finalizing stages is the Education Compact team, which will involve 3 members of school board, 3 members of council, the mayor plus 2 city staff members, the superintendent plus 2 city staff members, and then 12 stakeholders from the public, 6 selected by school board and 6 selected by the mayor with the consent of school board and council. And that group is to look at policy options for addressing some of the thorny problems. And as we've stressed all the way through, that group is simply advisory. Obviously, mayor, council, school board retain all their constitutional powers. So that's just the overview. And so today is a very important piece. The first time we're going to have a really substantive discussion among the elected officials, and this will happen on a quarterly basis. The next piece to go through is the proposed upcoming schedule. And let me just hand this out and pass it down. So this is simply initial attempt we made to map out how all these moving parts may flow together in the next few months, and spelling out some of the things that have happened already. Education contract adoption in August, children's cabinet starting in October, the meeting today, maybe we scroll down a little bit. I think the key point for right now, first of all, we want to have a regular schedule for this particular meeting, so it's not always a chore to work out 19 people's calendars. And so I believe it's been tentatively agreed that we would do this on every 5th Monday in 2018. So the next one that follows would be January 29, and then projecting out the rest of the year. And then if all our appointments have been complete, we would like to start the compact team process meeting in January, so they can have at least 2 substantive discussions prior to the introduction of the mayor's budget. And then likewise, the children's cabinet, which is really charged with working out some of the details in terms of how the city and RPS will support each other in setting some shared goals to support children inside out of the classroom. That meeting will be ongoing. And hope is by the end of this year that we will not only have a more collaborative budget process, but we will have, as a group and as a community, a much better understanding of the commitments that have been made for accomplishment in next year in progress, which is really what this is all about. So I'd like to pause here to see if Mr. Hilbert, Dr. Sapini, Mayor, want to comment on this part. Otherwise, we can sort of move on to the subject.
Ready to move on?
All right. So I believe next we have to go at the agenda. Okay. Updates on assignments and appointments from starting with Mayor Tony, and I believe this will be brief. Go ahead.
Say what?
So basically an update on the status of your appointments for education.
Yeah, no, we will have our appointments made public by the end of this month, so the end of the year. We'll finish that process, and I think we'll probably join the city council and school board as well in making those decisions here pretty soon.
Good morning, everyone, and I just want to welcome my new school board member, Kenny Gibson, personally. Thank you so much for being here. We have selected our 3 members, and they are Dr. Newbill, Mr. Jones, and Ms. Larson, and we appreciate their willingness to serve.
Dr. Sapini.
Thank you again. Good morning. And I'd like to certainly welcome my school board colleague, Kenny Gibson, to our first compact meeting. And as far as the school board, our community members for the compact have been decided on, so we're still accepting applications, and that should be coming by the end of the week.
Okay, so that's an update. Then moving on to the update from the Richmond Children's Cabinet. So that group has had sort of a planning meeting and the 2 official meetings. The third one is on tomorrow. Representing the city of Richmond on that team are we have Debbie Jackson, who's our DCAO for Human Services, Reggie Gordon, Director of Office of Community Development Building, Chris Grelke is our new Parks and Recreation Director, Shonda Giles from Social Services, myself, Ms. Kim Bridges, who's working for the governor, is assisting us in this process, especially without school time. And then from RPS, we've had, of course, Mr. Kranz, Miyako Timmons, and Angela Jones, and that from the Office of Family and Community Engagement. And that group is somewhat fluid, and it will shift from meeting to meeting in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of who exactly will be there. I will say the 2 things we've been working on the most have been on out of school time and developing a shared plan to connect essentially all kids with opportunity of access to a high quality out of school time program. And secondly, a more collaborative approach to developing the non-departmental funding as relates to education. So as many of you are aware, we significantly changed the application this year. We had input from RPS in developing that, and RPS will participate in some of the evaluations of applications in the education field as that goes in. And so it's an ongoing work group, and we will try to report out and develop documents and so forth to bring forward to you so you can see what's being talked about and what's been discussed. But I think it's been a productive process to date. So with that, where did Superintendent Grants go?
He's hiding in the corner.
Here we go. Sorry, Director Todd.
Good morning. Two things from update from Richmond Public School Administration. First off, I'd like to introduce Jason Cameras, who's our new superintendent. He's here today joining us. I've got to say, everyone in the administration and in our team looks forward to working with Jason. We've had a brief opportunity to meet him, and everyone's extremely excited about what he brings to the table and where he can take RPS going forward today and into the future. So welcome aboard. On the MOU side, which is really the big thing that this administration continues to work on, there's three things that we're focused on with the state. One is in the instructional side. We go through trainings once a month, what we call the principal leadership. Those have been ongoing. We have another one this Thursday, Wednesday, I think it is. Big thing there is focusing on alignment, making sure that what we teach inside our classrooms aligns with the state standards so that we can move forward. And eventually, we know under the MOU, for us to get out of the MOUs, we have to have 100% accreditation. And right now, we have 19 schools that are not accredited. So that's what we're focused on, is moving everybody to the fully accredited bucket. Secondly is human resources. And the thing there is making sure we get qualified teachers in front of all of our students. Today, we still have long-term subs that are in positions teaching our students, and that's not the ideal situation. The ideal is for us to have qualified teachers who are committed to Richmond and to our students. This isn't something that's new today. This is something that in my 4 years here has been an ongoing situation, and I think it was here long before I arrived here in Richmond. So it's becoming, our problem is making sure, our challenge is to make sure we get qualified teachers and we're hiring them early enough so that we're getting in front of the Henricos, the Chesterfields, and all of our surrounding counties. Third is in the financial area, and this is really a big thing in the MOU, is in the MOU, the state controls all of our expenditures. Every penny that the school system spends is controlled by the state. In the area of the state and federal grant, we cannot spend or incur a penny of expenditures without the state approval first. And so now that drags out the process. And we're into the middle of the details with them. I think we're getting into our 5th week in working through that, but it is a definite process working with the state. And then on the general purpose side, there in our MOU, they will review the overall budget, give us their blessing that they're okay with it, but they have the opportunity to tell the system on where to spend its funds and how to spend its funds. The big thing from the state is this: making sure that every dollar that the system receives is being spent for what? Student achievement. And that's what they want. Everything's geared towards student achievement. As long as you're on that path, then we won't run into any problems. But sometimes it's a challenge in making sure what we say is student achievement and believe, and the state concurs with what we believe we want to spend our funds for. So those are what the district's doing, and that kind of gives you an update from the administration on the MOU and everything else. Dad?
So any questions from elected officials for Mr. Grants?
That's a good one.
So I'm going to now turn over to Lillian Pepe Glenn and David Rose.
Thank you, Pat, and good morning, everyone. Mayor, members of the City Council. At this time, David Rose is Senior Vice President of Capital Board, the company and financial advisor for the city, will provide you with an overview of Metro City City's financial health, financial picture. It will leave the salient facts, and we look forward to any questions that you may have after David's presentation. David Rose.
Thanks, Selena. I'm going to wait a moment to make sure everyone gets a handout, and then folks in the audience will be able to see exactly what folks here at the dais. Again, good morning. I'm Dave Rose. I've had the good fortune of working with the city now with my partner, Roland Cooch, who's been handing out some of these documents for the better part of 20 years. So hopefully we'll give you a little perspective. Won't go that far back. But again, our focus this morning is to provide a brief financial overview of the city when it comes to, again, this meeting and other meetings, so you have a basis upon which to look at your education comeback. With that said, I want to touch on a few topics this morning right there listed. A little bit about the city's credit ratings and why do we start with that? Because in many ways that could be viewed as a proxy for the city's financial health and well-being. From there, I'm going to talk a little bit about some historic funding for schools that has been provided by the city as it relates to both the operational side as well as the debt service side. Then we're going to touch on a couple of the challenges the city has, particularly the pension funding levels. Talk about why that again is important, the kind of dollars that we do and necessary. Then we'll get into the general fund budgets, just let you see the last couple of 3 years. Again, all of this context to what hopefully will be some strategic plan that provides all folks happiness as well as it relates to trying to get increased funding. So to do that, we're going to touch upon the last couple of things there, which is what is your debt levels? How much is out there? What is your profile, if you would? And then what is your debt capacity? Meaning over the next several years, the next decade or so, what's your ability to take on new indebtedness responsibly? So if you could just turn the page. So let's talk about where your ratings are today. What we try to do is to provide you with a series of categories. These are not our categories, these are the categories that the National Credit Rating Agencies have. There are 3 major rating agencies, Fitch, Moody's, Standard & Poor's. You may have heard of them. All have been around for decades, and they are independent. They are basically folks that on an annual basis, if not more, review the city, review many cities, and they come to a conclusion about how the city looks. So you'll notice there, we are in what's called the second tier, very strong. That's not my terminology, that's their terminology. And you'll notice that within that second tier, there are 3 different levels, highest, middle, and lowest. And if you go down from that second tier to the 3rd tier, even the 4th tier, all of those tiers from 4 on up are considered investment grade. Below that, you get into what we like to call, in effect, jump off status. So from the 5th to 10th tiers, and we just consolidated that, that's sort of junk status. But where you are is you're right on the doorstep of AAA, which is the highest possible rating. And one of the things the mayor has given us a charge with is how do we get to AAA? What do we do? Well, some of the things that we do, we've already started to do under this mayor. And that is, as you know, from me just being in front of you about 10 days ago, is getting what we promised when the mayor started, and that is our audit done on time. And in fact, we didn't get it done on time, we got it done early. And by getting it done early, as some of you may have seen in the press release, it allowed us to actually put the city in a position to save, as we did last Monday, a week ago at this time. We refinanced some debt just for savings purposes and saved just a bit over $13 million over a 15-year period, all because we got our financial house in order. So that's the types of things. Now, I'd like to say that that financial house in order is enough to take care of everything, but it's a start. It's better than nothing, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So with that said, let's go on, if we could, to one of the reasons, or the reasons why you're rated so high, and the reasons why you're not at that target AAA. And I think it can be really viewed here in just a few bullet points. So the credit strengths, just for everybody, you know you've got a strong, robust, growing economy. very strong management. And the word management by the rating agencies is not just some of the people that are sitting in the audience, but also those of you that are on city council. That is also considered management when they talk about it. So the mayor and this group are management. Budgets are structurally balanced. We've been structurally balanced now for several years. That is critical. You all know that. And they care a whole lot about us not using one-shots or gimmicks to make the budget work. The next thing they look at is a very strong and growing unassigned fund balance. Think of that as your rainy day fund. Things go bad, you've got some of those dollars. The other thing about that fund is it allows us to avoid unnecessarily borrowing to pay bills. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we actually had to do what was called a tax anticipation note to the tune of some $75 million, which was just added costs just to pay the bills throughout the fiscal cycle of a year. We no longer do that. And then finally, we've had strict adherence to financial policy guidelines. Some of you that are up here know you sat on the financial committee of the city. We've created financial policies. We've stuck to all those policies, and that's a critical thing. And everything you're going to see today, make sure that when we recommend and talk about things, we are staying within those policies that were created and adopted by the city council. So that's the good stuff. That's why you're right there on the doorstep of AAA. But why we haven't broken through and hit the AAA can really be looked at in maybe 3 points. First, our pension levels, and we're going to have a graphic on that. We need to be at a minimum of 80%. And we're basically, I'll give you right now, we're roughly at about 65%. So we're going to show you that. And to get there, it's going to take some work. Really another way of saying it takes some dollars. The second thing, of course, the poverty rate. That's something that's been with us for decades, but that also a great burden, and it costs us a great deal on many fronts. And again, that's a credit weakness. And then finally, we do have some elevated debt levels. Not to suggest that with a well-thought-out plan, we can't do some more debt over and above what's being talked about. But we do have, again, an elevated debt level. Let's make no mistake about it. Okay, next page. All right, so for sake of time, I just want y'all to see the most recent reports, which just came out when we did this refinancing to save money. Each of the 3 rating agencies developed an in-depth report. These are just some quotes from each of the respective rating agencies. And you look, for example, you look at Moody's, and down at the bottom it says, what could make the ratings go up? That's by them, that's not by us. And then they say, what could make the ratings go down? So what could go up? Significant increases in our reserves and financial flexibility, as well as improved socioeconomic indicators, as I just said, the poverty. That's the type of thing that they care about, rightly so, in terms of how they could get us to AAA. What could do the opposite, go us lower than where we are, reduce financial flexibility, and of course, increasing debt burden, something that they are concerned about. So we want to be careful. There's a delicate balance here. Okay, next page, please. So let's give you a little bit of a perspective on what the contribution by the city has been to education over the last 5 years or so. And so what we've tried to do is to give you a sense of this with regard to the actual city contribution. We broke it out by operations, which is that top line, and then right below it, the debt service contribution. And then you can see the total contribution. So to give it a perspective, basically over the last 5 or so years, we've seen an increase of about $37 million from where we were in 2013. That comes to about a 27% increase over those period, and annually, that's close to a 5% increase in funding. You'll notice here, the general fund, again, that's been about 2.3%, The big driver on this has been in the debt service area. We were actually making, we meaning the city, about a $10 million contribution to schools in the form of debt service back in 2013. And in 2018, that had grown to almost $18 million. So that's about a 75% or so increase. Now, again, we recognize that prior to 2013, very little had been done in the way of funding for school infrastructure in terms of bricks and mortar. But as you know, over the last several years, the last 5 years or so, we've actually built 4 new schools. And you can see there, we've got some of the designations, the MLK, Oak Grove, etc. And we've sort of cited that up there. So again, to put this in perspective, graphically, wanted to see that. This is just the facts. So basically, school contribution all told over the last 5 years has grown slightly under 5%. And at the same time, the city's general fund for everything, including schools, has grown at about half that rate. It's been about 2.8%. So just want to give you a perspective as we continue to move on. Okay? I mentioned a few moments ago pension funding and what is our challenges. Here you can see it. If you go back to what was really the turn of the decade, we were actually at or below even 60%, which was considered, again, not acceptable. Today, we're up and around the 64, 65% level, but as you can see there, the target, the minimum target, is 80%, and ideally, you want to be at 100%. So again, this is a challenge. Let me just give you a perspective, and that is for every 1% to go from what would be roughly 64, 65% up to 80%. So basically, about 15 percentage points. Each one of those percentage points is slightly under $9 million. So we're talking about if all of a sudden we had a money tree, we would need about $150 million in today's dollars. These things change every year, but about $150 million just to get to that minimum of the 80%. So again, that's one of your challenges. These things happen over time, and we understand that there has been a plan in place, but again, it is still considered lower than what we want and we need for a city of our stature. Okay? Next. So I mentioned a few moments ago that we wanted to give you a sense of budgets. So what you've got here is 3 years of adopted budgets. On the top is the revenue sources. On the bottom is the expenditures. You'll notice here we've included 2018, the year that we're in right now. Again, for everyone's benefit, we talk about fiscal years that really covers a couple of different calendar years. So the fiscal year 18 basically will end upcoming June 30th. So we're basically about halfway through this fiscal year of 2018. Some people say it's the 2017-2018 fiscal year. We've just taken the liberties of calling it FY18 as the end. You'll notice here that basically, depending upon how it's looked at, we have about $700 million of revenues for the general fund. The general fund is where the dollars come from for education. In addition to a general fund, there's also special enterprise funds, such as your utilities. Those are not part of this because those are all paid for by user fees. So they don't in any way impact the general fund. They are basically separate and apart from the general fund in terms of dollars. I think the important thing here to note is that our general fund revenues in and around that 700 range. You look down on the expenditures, and then you can see their education basically is about a third of that. You know, you've got about 158 or so million in FY18 out of the roughly 700 million. And you can get a sense of all of that. They also have special debt service funds. A lot of these expenditures are required. Again, so the amount of flexibility that we have is limited. Those of you might ask, why was it 717, maybe 690 or some odd? That's because, again, we moved towards a series of best practices under the mayor so that we would best reflect what the revenues are that you can raise, that you have control over, and the expenditures that you can spend that you have control over. So we wanted to do that. Okay, next page. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the city's debt and understand as a component of those expenditures how much is being spent on debt service. And I will talk about here, what you see here is for this general fund. This is all of your debt service. This is for schools, this is for infrastructure, this is for technology, any number of things all together. So what you'll notice here is there's a red line. And we did that purposely because in the fiscal year that we're in 2018, on the right-hand side, we'll round off here, we are spending about $64 million of that overall roughly $700 million is going towards debt service on projects that are already out there, and projects that have been done. Those are the debts that we have. What you'll notice, however, is that over the next several years, that debt service will actually rise before it then starts to drop down. So the challenge here is in future budgets, starting with 2019, we're going to have to come up with some more dollars before we even borrow another penny of our capital program. I'll go into that in a minute. So if you go to the next page, what we did here was take that same dark green with the red line, and then we superimpose our projected new debt service. All of that new debt service is part of what the city council, previous city councils approved as their spending plan for any number of different projects, as well as what is expected to be spent over the next 4 to 5 years. So what you'll find, and I'm not sure it's as obvious, but if you move to the categories, you'll see we're way above that red line. If you go to the fourth table over, it says debt service, in parentheses, increase versus the FY 2018. So what keeps us up at night, before we even start talking about other needs, is that we're going to have to come up with a bunch of new revenues to meet the overall capital program that we've already incurred and the capital program that City Council has approved for the next several years. Now, that's not to say that there can't be some reworking of that. Not to say that all of that and the timetable and the way we're thinking about doing that can't get amended. But as it's currently planned, we're looking at upwards of some 19 or 20 million additional dollars versus FY18 by the 2021-2022 time frame. And starting in 2019, we need here almost 9 million additional dollars under the way it's set up. So again, this is sobering, but I will tell you that with all of this, we still are within our financial policy guidelines. None of this is broaching or are broaching, I need to go back to school, to figure out, again, we're not broaching our policies, but we are pushing up against them. Okay. So, observations here. We are in compliance with our financial policies, but talking about doing upwards of $250,000 extra dollars with regard to the city's proposed CIP capital improvement program. And again, in doing that, We're still looking at, as we said, upwards of 19 million in the next few years. Okay. I mentioned earlier that we're going to talk about debt capacity. Where's there some light at the tunnel, if you would? So I have been in front of, my colleagues and I have been in front of City Council, we've been in work sessions, we've been in meetings over the years, and we've talked about what the debt capacity is. And what that speaks to is within financial best practices, how much more debt can we borrow before we worry about the cash flows? Just simply, how much more debt can we borrow in any given year or years and not broach a policy that we have? And that policy is that red line there. Right above that red line is total debt service as a percentage of total revenues. Said another way, how big can our credit card be in a given year? So what we're saying is that we will not go above and have to come above 10 cents of every dollar that we have for debt service. We're going to use the other 90 cents on other things. So where we are right now is we're using around 8 cents or 8% of every dollar towards debt service. What you then see is that sort of light green. That's that projected debt service that we showed you a moment ago that causes our debt service to go higher in terms of dollars. But we still have the ability, before we worry about how to pay for it, to borrow some new monies. So here's what the latest, because it's a constantly changing formula. Year to year it changes. It's based upon the size of the budget, based upon some other factors. But between now and effectively the next 5 years, if we do things the same way we've always done them, and I'm not suggesting that, I'm just giving you that perspective, we have about $65 million to spend over the next 5 years. That's not a lot of money, we know that. And sometimes I've been in front of council, we've had $8 million, and other times we've had $50 million. But that number right now, given where our budget is, given the way our debt structure is, given the way our pay down is about $65 million. However, the subsequent 5 years, because of the way we pay our debts off very rapidly, which is one of our policies, we're the positive year. So if we look at this on a 10-year horizon, we actually have an additional, you can see there on the bullet, $415 million of additional capacity that frees up in that second 5 years. So you take the first 5 and the second 5, we're talking about adding those together, we'll round off here, we're talking about slightly under $500 million of debt capacity, which could go for schools, housing, technology, whatever it is that the council and others decide. That's not for us. But I want to give you that perspective that there is a very significant debt capacity over the next decade. So with that being said, I'm just happy to answer the questions. That's just a disclaimer that we're not looking to sell you any debt. We're just simply trying to provide you perspective. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rose, for the presentation. I guess there are a couple of clarifying questions. So the date by which this analysis is run is effective June 30, 2017. Is that correct?
It is actually as effective as right now. But yes,
It's effective as of right now.
we did not factor in the refunding, for example, something like that. It's as up to date as it is.
And that, I was going to ask about the refunding and what you opened up with the fact that the city is saving $13 million of debt service over the next 15 years or whatever the time was. For the city council that set aside $2 million to prepay into pension liability, which again, it's nominal, but it changes that funding status slightly. I would like to, however, just add more context because I think charts and data is often only as good as what the presenter chooses to present. And in the instance of our pension liability funding status. If you go historically to 2008, that's before the financial crisis, we were at, I think, 72%. So while your chart shows, yes, we've made meaningful progress since 2009, historically, if you go further back a decade, we were 70%, and even at 80% in previous years. So I just think that that's very important to not shadow or spin the data to mean one thing, where the city actually had done quite better. And that's why I asked about the date of this, particularly with the refunding status. When you talk about the debt capacity and when you talk about the approved CIP, the approved CIP is what has been planned, but is not actually reflective in the debt capacity to the degree that we have this amount of debt capacity, but we already have this plan, which is going to eat up that available debt capacity.
Let's go to that. It actually
So what,
is-
outside of the $66 million debt capacity, if you looked at the CIP budget that was approved, how much is left?
So here's the answer. If you go to, I think it's around 200, next page. So we've got about 227 million still to borrow within that approved CIP, because it also includes not just some projects that are part of the CIP, but other pieces of debt that have been previously approved but not yet issued. So you've got a combination here in that number. So that's why I said earlier, there is some element of discretion that council will have going forward, to not necessarily have to borrow all of that from the projects the way it's set. You've got some element of discretion. I don't have it in front of me, and the staff may know that. Go back to page 9. Go to page 9. Excellent. Page 9. 9. Keep going. Keep going. There it is. Okay, so you see there, Councilman, right there, you can see projected tax supported debt service, approximately the 227 I alluded to. And then you'll see there's two parts, the 99, 13, and then you've got the 115 million, which again, also not yet borrowed. So you've got some element of if you would. I don't know right here what those projects are. Yeah.
Public utility.
Public radio.
Communications.
This is not utilities.
Right, that's.
Yeah, none of this is utilities. When we talk, that we call revenue bonds, that's not in any way part of this. No. Yes, ma'am.
So 228 million includes the 66 million?
No.
Okay.
The 66 million is separate from that. So the idea would be that let's assume you went from 228, let's say, do my math, 66, let's say that gets us to roughly 300, 290, 300. So if you had said that number was 290, then my 66 would be 0. Because you still have, capacity-wise, the ability to do about 65 million on top of this. On top of this. Right, yes. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you. So taking a look at the city debt service contribution to the school system versus the debt service that we are currently maintaining, and it appears to be that it's roughly about 28%. And you said that since 2013, we've seen an increase in about 76%, which is encouraging. I'm glad to see that we're moving in that direction. That said, you know, as I see us moving forward here, I'm curious, and I'd like for both bodies to consider whether 28% is sufficient, but I'm also interested in the history here, because if we had such a dramatically lower percentage or amount being serviced in the past, I'd be very interested to see over the past 5 years, going back to 2008, what percentage of the city's debt service was allocated to schools.
I'm happy to provide that, because we've actually done a 10-year look back, but we just chose for today to do 5 years. And Roland, do you remember, when we did a 10, I think that number was even smaller, if I'm not mistaken, going back a decade ago.
Yeah, I have to.
We don't remember exactly, we can get that for you very easily.
I'd have to imagine so if so much less wasn't being
We got it, we got that.
So I think something that's important for our bodies to keep in mind is that this isn't merely a snapshot of where we are now, and saying that 28% is necessarily the ideal. I imagine that many of us want to work towards ensuring that we're contributing a higher amount towards the facilities needs and the capital needs of the school district as well. But it's very important to keep in mind the historical perspective here. And if you look at the cuts that the school system went through after the 08 crash from 09 and beyond, if you look at our operating funds, you see dramatic cuts. And many city agencies, I'm sure, went through similar dramatic cuts. But I think that there will be some catch-up to be played in order to ensure that we're getting the resources that our schools need.
And we understand, we will get that for everyone. We'll typically just go through the city administrator and get that. Yes, sir. Welcome.
If the city were to achieve a AAA rating, how much does the debt capacity increase as a result of the cheaper cost of debt?
Great question. I think there's two parts to that question, really. Number one, by virtue of AAA versus the AA plus, AA, what is the differential? It's probably minimal, because that AA plus range is very, very high. So I think just in absolute terms, maybe we're talking 5, 10, 15 basis points, which that means 0.1% basis point is 1/100th. So we're not talking about a lot of dollars. I think it's more of what it means to a city to be able to say, we are AAA, as you know. I think your second question was, what does it maybe mean to debt capacity? Does it give us some more debt capacity? I don't think it gives us an appreciable increase in debt capacity. Again, what is a little sobering is, as we said earlier, if indeed we tried to add debt over and above where we are, we're really pushing the debt capacity. That actually makes it a little harder for AAA. So for whatever it's worth, I think that the charge that we have, and I don't want to speak for the mayor because I can't, it's here. However, I think what he has said to us, and we've heard, is we want to do everything in best practices. We want to be responsible. We want to be sustainable. So if we're going to make this as great a city as we can, and we're going to increase funding, as Mr. Barlow, I believe that's your name, talked about, we've got to be cognizant of both debt capacity, but also debt affordability. So we understand, because let me say this. This isn't our first rodeo in working with cities. We've been doing this, I've been fortunate to do this 35 years. And I've yet to run into a city that has more dollars than needs. Just unfortunately, that's not the way it works. And yesterday, I was talking, I got a call from the mayor of Cincinnati, the manager, because we're in the same mode, same time frame. And they too have, in their case, more needs than dollars. But trying like here to keep responsible, the key is we're looking at that, in their instance, over a 5-year horizon, as opposed to just a 1-year horizon. I think part of our challenge, and I think will be, how do we get and maximize what you're looking for, what the city's looking for, over a multi-year period, so that we don't have a surprise 1 or 2 years from now, where the mayor's got to go to city council and say, we did all that stuff last year. What you didn't realize was now you've got, we're facing Armageddon. So I think part of all that's a long-winded way, but
Mr. Rose, I have 2 questions for you. Number one is, and just this is your opinion right here, your expert opinion. Is AAA number 1 within grass? And number 2, can you add more debt and still achieve AAA?
So let me answer that backwards. I think we can add more debt and still be on a trajectory to to AAA. So the reason I say that is because, and a good example like Cincinnati, when we had gotten involved, right before we got involved, they were downgraded, and they still had a robust economy. But what they did not have, by their own admission, Mayor Crandall would tell you, they did not have a multi-year plan. They operated year to year, and they did not have formalized policies. They had informal policies. So the rating agencies didn't have a handle. Whenever they issued debt, they didn't have a comfort level. So what did we do? We created a multi-year program, we finished financial policy guidelines, and we upped the debt. And sure enough, they actually went up and got upgraded. The debt levels are not the main driver. When you look at the new policies the ratings have, the rating agencies have, you may recall this, Mayor, and you're going to see them. Debt is a component, but it's not the main component. The bigger components are, you asked, I'll get to this point, are the overall demographics, the health of the city, stable budgeting, sustainable budgeting, meeting your policy guidelines, and having very strong reserves. For whatever reason, they view cash as king. And our unassigned fund balance is the equivalent of that cash being king. And so that's a red line for them, not to go below, but to enhance it. And so to answer your question, I think the answer is yes, we can add more debt. Number two, it's not going to hurt us to get into AAA if it's done responsibly. And then you asked the first question, do I think that's realistic? I think it's realistic over a roughly 4 to 5 year time frame if we do the following. Continue to have budgets that are balanced and no gimmicks. We continue to meet or exceed our financial policy guidelines. We continue to be fortunate to have an economy that grows in a robust state capital with all the resources. And if we do all that, and we do it smartly, we can continue to work on that poverty level, which costs our budget in many different ways. And they want to see that. We don't have to have a poverty level equal to the state, so that's 16% or whatever, to be AAA. But we do have to start chipping into it by all these other things. And we understand if we can spend more money responsibly with schools, that helps all of that. So that hopefully is a long-winded answer, but hopefully helpful. Yes, ma'am.
If the city and the school system collectively decided to do a public-private partnership for facilities funding, would that count against our debt capacity?
So that's a good question. We're used to that. The PPEA has been around for, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years. What we recommend, we've done that probably half a dozen times now with Virginia local governments as an advisor. What has been the best practice on that is to split the PPA between the, we'll call it the design, the build, the construction, the operational side of that, and then break out the financial side of that. And this financial side of that, because to your question, the rating agencies will count all of that off-balance sheet debt against the city. We may not like to hear that, but that's the reality. They've gotten savvy to the concept that you get into these long-term leases that are done by, let's say, a school board. That counts against your debt level as a council member on the city side. So there's no magic to any of that. But PPAs have been very effective. We've used them. But you want to have the financial side totally transparent. That's pretty clear to us. Therefore, you're in control of the financial side, and frankly, the design build folks that do this, all they really care about is that a project gets done, they get to construct a project, they design a project, move it quickly, and then they say, fine, you want to, you're, as long as you provide the dollars, they're a willing participant. That's been our experience. So,
Just a follow-up.
yes.
So if we, as the city, let's say the schools in the city collectively decide to put together an agreement where they pay $10 million for 10 years for repayment through a public-private and we allocated that to the city, or I'm sorry, to the schools, and they paid it, you're saying that would still count again our debt capacity? So tonight at City Council, we're considering something for our HA that's $4.7 million in debt. And I've been asking, is it going to count against our debt capacity? And I've been told it's not. So
I don't
how
know about
is
that project, so I can't answer you right now responsibly
Okay.
about that project. I just don't know anything about it. So I don't, maybe John, I don't know about that project. But I do, I'm saying, that's a project I'm not aware of that's going on tonight. So I'm going to give you yes or no, I just don't know. But I think the point here is, it's one thing if we give the schools a couple $1 million and they want to do some bus leases or something like that. The order of magnitude on that is not typically the type of thing that the rating agencies will know. You start getting into $7 and $10 million, which is going to be leveraged for what would be in the $100 million of capital, and that is absolutely pops off the charts. They see that, they know that. The other problem with that is you just go to give the schools that kind of money. The ultimate borrower, the ultimate ratings are you, the city. It's not the schools. In Virginia, there is no school board that has a credit rating. And that's because, right or wrong, I'm not trying to pick sides here, that's because the way our governmental structure operates, different than Maryland, different than North Carolina, we being the city, are ultimately viewed as the proxy for the school's financial well-being. That's a big difference. So as a result, we give them dollars, and they in turn go into some lease arrangement. There's not the transparency there that you want to see. You can borrow that money, you the city, on their behalf, give them that same $10 million for whatever they want. That's your decision. You're going to get more bang for your buck by doing that. You're going to be in the driver's seat. When I say you, meaning the city / the school board will be in the driver's seat. And we're indifferent, by the way. We're an advisor either way. It doesn't change us. I don't care how you borrow that or don't. That's not what matters to me. Yes, sir.
And I'm just trying to get back to some clarity on the previous question that I asked, and I did some calculations. So I was referenced to go to page 9 on the projected tax support of CIP. If we add up those fiscal years, the additional incremental CIP that has been approved, it adds up to just over $60 million. And if we have debt capacity available of $66 million, that means that outside of our currently approved CIP, there's only about $6 million available for assignment. That's the...
I'm not sure, Parker, I'm following your asking.
So the council has approved a CIP, but those projects have not broken ground. Those projects have not added to the debt service because we haven't borrowed it yet.
Right.
Okay. If you add up all of what we have approved,
That's your view.
and what is projected to be the additional debt service.
It's right there, that
Right.
fourth column. Or let's say the third column, and the fourth column is the incremental versus 18. That's what
Versus 18,
Yes.
but it's not, it is only a comparison
No.
to 18. It is
Go
not
to the third
incremental.
column, Parker.
The red column is not a summation. The
There's
red
a
column is,
summation right there, total debt service. So go to the column to the left of it, there's your summation. So for example, just take 2022. Your current debt service in 2022 of debt that's already been issued is $68 million. Then, for the debt you're talking about, which is the debt that will be borrowed over the next several years, in 2022, that'll translate under certain interest rate assumptions that we made to another $14 million. So what I think you're asking, if I'm mistaken, Melanie, the total debt service in 2022 will be that roughly $82, $83 million. That's, now, having said that,
So there is, that's not represented in this chart, there is debt retirement.
That's
That is not, that is
That's
calculated.
factored. That's factored into the 68.
That is factored in.
Yeah, the first column. That debt retirement's already factored in. We can give you another category. That debt retirement's-
But nevertheless, it's still about $20 million, so at the moment, you're,
The 68 already has any of the debt retired. So that it's like a net number for you. I wish there was, I think maybe you're asking is there because we retired?
well, it would be helpful, so let's think about your checking account, right? This is your balance today. These are your additions and these are your subtractions, and this is going to be your balance after you calculate that.
That's your 68.
And what we're not seeing here, we're seeing what's the projected additions, but we're not seeing what those projected subtractions are because of debt retirement.
Yeah, you already have it.
So you've already made some assumptions in the tabulations that
We
we're
know
not pretty.
exactly what your debt retirement looks like. See, all of the debt.
So what I'm trying to get at, David, and I'm sorry to keep arguing this, but I don't think that the $66 million is an accurate reflection of how much new CIP we can put into the budget based on our current approved CIP.
Okay, so maybe if I'm.
So the question is, we have an approved CIP
Right.
that gets us for 5 years. How much new can be assigned
Yeah.
without having to go back and realign and readjust and make tweaks to the approved CIP?
Well, from a capacity standpoint, before we talk about affordability, which is that red increase, we have about 66 million of capacity within the 5 years.
That can be spread out over the duration of the 5 years.
Right. However,
But much of that has to fall in that 50 year.
Yeah, don't worry, what I say is, we understand how to do some debt structuring and all, but just go with us. We can do that type of amount, whether it's the early part of 5 years, the latter part of 5 years. We know within that 5 years, we can meet that. And again, it changes every year, that's something. But the subsequent 5 years, that's where it gets your big drop off. Because then, we've got 400 plus million, we said 415 million to house capacity. But just make clear, that's one thing, that 68 that I was talking about, that includes already, unfortunately, includes the factor of debt which has been dropped off. I could give you the details of that easily.
So it's 10:15, and we do have two more presentations from RPS administration, but I believe Mr. Rose will be available for any elected official for further follow-up discussion and detail. And obviously, this is not the last conversation we'll be having on these. So, Mr. Byron? Yes, sir. Thank you, David.
Good morning, I'm David Myers, I'm the school's Chief Financial Officer. Today I'd like to give a brief update about where we are preliminarily with our 2019 development of our school division's operating budget. Something we will not discuss at this point because we have Mr. Krantz who's going to also have a presentation is renovations and construction of new school buildings. So the numbers that we look at will not include debt service. However, it's always nice when folks that present before you have a similar message to yours. Something that we don't see a whole lot when we talk about school funding and budgets and working with city council and mayor is the two words, thank you. We have a lot to be thankful for with our teachers, our school administrators, our parents, our community, but specifically for today, talking about funding for schools. The thank you is for city council and for the mayor for providing the continued resources they have for the school division. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have additional needs. We're going to talk today about how we're documenting those needs, but we do need to take a look at the resources that the city has invested in our school system. At the same time, we need to take a look historically over the last roughly 10 years at what the state has done to us. And we're going to take a look at what's happened since the economic downturn, there was a better phrase that someone used, maybe Mr. Douglas, about what happened back in 2009. But when we look at our funding from the city versus our funding from the state, we see that the city has absolutely paid their fair share. We see the state, on the other hand, has not. And the state, I'm certain, will talk about if they were here. They would talk about reasons why, and specifically the negative effects with regard to our composite index in Richmond. We'll talk about that in just a minute. These are the real numbers, though. $27.6 million since 2009. The budget's grown. Real dollars, not adjusted for inflation. We've lost over $2 million from the state. You see, 2009 they were $133.4 million. For this year, we're at $131.1. Some important numbers, although they're small on the bottom. Inflation over that period of time, 16.9%. If there are any economists in the room that I didn't account for the right factors, hold that till after the presentation. But something else, more important is we have roughly the same number of students. We have a few more, but roughly the same. So the city's today, in the operating budget, is investing $27.6 million more dollars than the highest budget we ever had was in 2009. So the city's doing their fair share. In fact, the $27.6 million actually outpaces the rate of inflation. You can see that it outpaces the rate of inflation by about $7 million. State, on the other hand, you see that they have underfunded us compared to the rate of inflation by over $20 million. So again, shame on you, state. We need for them to work with us. We need for them to put a higher priority in public education. So just a snapshot, if the state had done their share, we're at $292 million, not including debt service, and we're not talking about capital in this presentation. Our budget would be at $310 million. The city's done their share. In fact, more than done their share. The state has not. Something that folks talk about, that the city is not paying their fair share. So we pulled our cohort group, which is historically Newport News, Portsmouth, Hampton, and Norfolk. We also pulled our neighbors, Chesterfield, Henrico, and Hanover, to look at the percentage of the locality budget. This may be slightly different than Mr. Rose's presentation, but it's not far off. So this is ranked highest and lowest. We also realize to have safe, nurturing school divisions, our neighborhoods have to be safe, our schools have to be safe, we have to invest in public safety. So we know that that is a tremendous expenditure for the city. So when we look and we compare Richmond to our cohorts, and we also compare Richmond to our neighbors, Hanover, Henrico, Chesterfield, that we know don't have the breadth and depth of issues with regard to public funding, I think all we can say is thank you. Now, we've got a new budget approach. Doesn't mean that we don't have needs, but what it does mean is that we need to document what those needs are. So everyone in this room and everyone in this city can understand what it is we need. And this is what we've done this year. We've gone to a site-based approach with our schools. We've gone to a zero-based approach with our departments that support our schools. Our school board has provided documented priorities with what they have worked with their constituents, what they have seen in the schools, and what they brought to the table with their beliefs about our school system. We also have currently 2 online options for our community to submit any suggestions for us all the way through the budget cycle. We have 4 public input opportunities. This is a little hard to see. This is one of the zero-based budgets. This just happens to be the school board clerk. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. So this is hers. What this says is you start with 0. It says what you need, where you're going to get it, why you need it, and what's it going to cost. And if you can't document that, you don't get it. Every department, every single one of roughly our 125 departmental budgets will do the same thing. This is our school budget. This is one from Carver. This outlines staffing needs, recurring instructional needs in our buildings, one-time purchases, and facility needs. So this is the raw submission. We're currently in the process of correlating all that information so we can provide that to our new superintendent and to the school board so we can set priorities as we move forward. We have needs. We have recurring needs. As Mr. Rose said, school boards in Virginia have no ability to generate any of their own revenue. So for our employees, with regard to salaries and benefits, to stay as competitive tomorrow as they are today in our economy, we know that we've got to somehow adjust for the rate of inflation. So we know that that's going to continue to go up, some type of cost of living for our employees. We also know that there's an increase, continued increase in healthcare. We hope that we're going to see our retirement level off, and it looks like that we will for this year, but we don't know about the future. But we know we're going to have additional costs with regard to salaries and benefits. We also know that for our graduates to be competitive, when they move past K-12, we have to have current curriculum and current technology. Now, does that mean that every child needs a laptop? Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe or maybe not. But we have to have current technology, and that's much more than just laptops. And that's something that's got to be a decision by our community about what level of investment. We do not have a replacement plan in place today for a full replacement for all of our technology and our planned technology in the school division. It doesn't mean we don't have technology replacement, we just don't have a budget for full replacement. Also, when we look at furniture, pictures, and equipment, we know that there are recurring needs. Cafeteria tables break, stage curtains wear out. We don't have a replacement plan for those. We pay for those as they break. But we know that there's going to be continued needs. And as we look at the submissions that come forward from the schools and from our departments, we're going to see that all of these are included. School construction and renovation, that's a topic for just a few minutes from Mr. Krantz. That is not part of this presentation. Another thing that we're going to continue to work with, and this is just a frame up at this moment. We talked about poverty in the city. This is a snapshot from the last time we were able to collect free and reduced lunch percentages. You can see that we are significantly higher than our cohorts and very significantly higher than our neighbors. That note on the bottom is really important. The most recent information we have from DOE, we are second highest in the state. So what does that mean? Poverty shows its face in a lot of ways in the school system. We picked two comparative schools, neither of which are the most affluent in either county. Highland Springs generated 2 years ago in their school activity funds $1 million. That wasn't Deep Run, that wasn't Godwin, it's Highland Springs. Lee Davis, which is not Atlee or Hanover, generated almost $1 million. Our largest high school generated $210,000. So what does that mean? That means that funding comes from somewhere. The new band uniforms, new band equipment that comes from those activity fund dollars has got to be funded by the city. Look at those three bullets. We don't charge any school fees. Everybody that goes to school in the surrounding counties probably pays $200, $300, $400 a year for school fees. There's also a back-to-school list of things that students need to bring the first day. We don't do that. Extracurricular support. The $300 pair of track shoes, the $500 DeMarini bat, the $8,000 saxophone for the child to play. Most of our parents can't afford that. Somehow, if we want to compete, we have to be able to provide those things. One thing that is very hard to document is volunteer hours. Think about the volunteers, what they do for us. Watchdog dads and lunch monitors, they work on the outside of the schools, they read in our classrooms. To have that same level of support, we have to pay for that. So when we look at the difference between folks that don't have resources and time compared to folks that do have resources and time, and that doesn't have anything to do with desire. That's not having the resources and the time to be able to invest in the schools, because many of our folks have to work. They'll have somebody at home that can come be in the schools during the day. At the very bottom, you see that funding burden falls in the city. Can't finish the conversation today without just talking about the composite index for a moment. Our composite index for next year has already been published. It's going to go up 3.5%. 3.5% means if all the factors were the same as today, we would lose $4 million of state funding. Shame on you. Shame on you. So look at us at 49.25 compared to everyone else. Specifically look at the ones on the right-hand side of the graph. Those are our comparison cohort. 29.58, 27.81. We're twice as high as they are, almost. So when we look at the slice of the pie that we receive from the state, we are penalized significantly for the calculation itself. Even look at the state average, it's under 0.4. Without getting into the details, but trying to educate folks, this calculation comes from a student wealth portion and a per capita wealth portion. The thing that I want everybody to focus on is the arbitrary 2/3 and 1/3 percentage weighting that's given to those two components. So as you look at the top where it says student wealth, RPS in the state, it says that our property values per student are higher than the state average. Our income per student is higher than the state average. And our sales tax per student is much higher than the state average. Of course, sales tax would be because we're a commerce center. Much as you see on the bottom, much like the right of Ann Arbor Chesterfield. However, when you look at the bottom, you see property values per capita is below the state average, significantly. Household income, below the state average. Retail sales, barely above the state average, but that's because we're a commerce center. So the fact that that weighting for students is twice as high as per capita means when we look at our enrollment versus our school-age children, we only get 71.5% of our school-age children that come to our school system. Compared to our neighbors and our cohort, the comparison average is state average. We really need to have the state look at this 2/3 and 1/3. There is no evidence from 35 years ago that this was based on research. It was an effort, admittedly, for primarily urban school divisions that have a lower percentage of students coming to their school system. It was an effort to help. It's an arbitrary number, and we want the state to take a look at that. Very simply, just looking at the math, if we had the same percentage as the state average, our income from the state would go $5.5 million a year. So a very brief update. I did want to see if there were any questions before I turn this over to Mr. Krantz, and he's going to talk about facilities. Yes, ma'am?
How do we calculate the property now that we don't take, bring the funds out?
Yeah, we can. We can't do that, but the state can. And I don't know if they take the Title I numbers, or that's where I think the problem is. There's some Title I. We have to submit our Title I information, but we can't collect poverty because of our criminal district. Yes, sir.
So going to slide 4, which is the adopted budget versus budget based on inflation. This is something I alluded to earlier today. Now, I wasn't around in 09, I was still in school myself. And so I'm not sure if looking at the 09 budget, everyone was satisfied with where the school district was financially, but my gut is telling me that there were likely needs that we hadn't yet been accounted for. But if we took the 2009 budget, adjusted it for inflation, and then you look at the actual funds allocated, do we have an idea? Obviously, we have an idea by seeing that white space in between, but can you give us an estimate of how much that amount differs? I recall it being somewhere close to $300 million.
Oh, I'm sorry, I understand your question. I won't do that math in my head right now, but yeah, I'll certainly get that to you.
Okay. And the reason I bring that up is that although I do applaud the state the city for helping us get to a point where we are receiving more than we would have in 09 as adjusted for inflation, I think we have to seriously consider the cuts that RPS has gone through since 2009 when crafting our budget and our policy.
That's a great point. Part of that was staffing, of course, and we were still in the neighborhood of 300 positions fewer than we were then, much like many other governments and school systems.
So a couple of years ago, we looked at spending by category, and we did a comparison between our,
Instruction.
all the same localities that we have up here, and what we found was the biggest gap in the spending was on facilities. Is that still the case?
It is. For this, we have separated that facilities discussion along with debt service.
Right.
that Mr. Crane is going to talk about this tonight.
But I think a lot of times the assumption, and I think the second biggest gap was on special education. The assumption always is that we're spending more on instruction, and that's why we have such a higher per pupil. But a big chunk of that is on facilities.
Yeah, just on
Right.
I think one of the things that distorts those comparisons is the federal funding that we receive. Funding is funding.
Right.
But what has occurred with the federal funding is that the state, maybe even passively or unintentionally, has taken that federal funding and supplanted that in place of their own funding for us.
Right.
And that was never the intent of the federal funding.
This is something that-
Yes. Well, thank you very much. If there are any questions, I'll be around after the meeting, and I'll ask Mr. Krantz to come up and talk about facilities.
I appreciate the two presentations that we've had from staff, for the administration as well as from the school board. And I think it's a lot easier to present historical data, but what I don't think has been presented to both boards collectively is projected data. And I think if we had a 5-year forecast for both the city budget as well as the school budget, it would help us in making future decisions. It's easy to look in the rearview mirror, but this whole compact is supposed to be looking towards tomorrow. And so I asked that that be presented.
I wish Russ, I think we can, that was fun. Mr. Krantz?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. I apologize, we'll email this to y'all. But I'm going to give you some quick information and a quick overview on facilities, because most of y'all heard all this, but some statistical information to keep in mind as we look at RPS and its facilities. Right now, since 2005, RPS and the school board has closed 17 schools, which eliminated 1 million square feet of space and 6,681 seats. 4 new schools were built in 2013 and 14, which added an additional 575,000 square feet and 3,700 seats. The net reduction was a reduction of 425,000 square feet and 2,981 seats. The other thing to keep in mind is this. RPS has 4.8 million square feet of space. Right now, today, in the general purpose budget, RPS's maintenance department receives $1.5 million to maintain those facilities. And over the last 13 years, that's been its number. In the case of CIP, on average, RPS received over the last 13 years about $4 million a year. So that's 5.5 million square feet. Now, if you look at any industry standard, the amount of money that should be reinvested back into a building, if it's a 50-year life, you take 2% of the replacement value, and that's $17.3 million today. Now that shortfall, each year it goes by, continues to grow. When you see the numbers you're going to see tonight, and compare it back to 14-15, we've seen construction costs increase 10% in just that short period of time. And that obviously has an impact on what we're going to have needs going forward, and each year right now is projected to grow pretty significantly. So, the factors we considered as we developed this plan, one, we looked at our building conditions, and we'll talk about that in a second. 2, we looked at the academics of each facility. 3, we looked at the safety of our buildings. 4, the socioeconomics. 5, the ethnicity of each building. Our projected enrollment. Our special education, which is significant because RPS and special education runs right now today almost 20% percentage enrollment. State average is about 8%, 8 to 9%. And so the services we have to provide are significant. Just from a capacity standpoint, a classroom, let's say it's 750 square feet, if I have, and I'm going to use functional capacity, in grade 4, I'm going to put 22 students in the room. That same space for special education students can only have 9 students in the room. That's the same classroom, but when we start talking about empty seats and capacity, a significant component of it is, how is that classroom being used? And that becomes a major issue. The cap that our board directed us to develop in our plan was to keep our elementary capacity not to exceed 700 students. Now, there's 25 elementary schools in this city. Of the 25 elementary, typically you need 500 students to break even. That's a general barometer. 15 of our 25 schools are below 500 students. On a middle school, you typically need about 750 students to break even. Out of 7 middle schools, we only have 1 that's above that number. And then in high schools, including our specialty schools, out of 8, which typically you want to be near 1,000, we only have 2. Okay? We have small community-based schools. Our challenge is that it's easy to say there's lots of empty seats, and there are. I won't dispute that. But an empty seat's computed based off of the capacity. And we capped our building capacity at 85 to 90% of functional. And we'll get into that detail in a second. When we look at the current condition of our buildings, we rank them with complete, major, minor, and no work, or no major renovation work to be done. And you can see 23 of the 44 K-12 buildings all needed complete or major renovation. Now that's not unusual when you look at the age of our buildings. Of the 44 buildings, 70% are greater than 50 years of age. And half of that 70% are older than 70 years of age. And they continue to age. The capacity, here's our number, the grades, your RPS max in the state, and how we computed it. Remember what I said, capacity is simply a mathematical computation. We kept it at 85 to 90% so that schools have the ability, when their demographics change, when the needs change inside that building, the building has the classroom space in order to address those student needs. And we'll talk about that in a second. Some statistical information and graphs. You look at our total elementary population, you see it's going to decline over the next 9 years. It shows from back to 12, which is actual, to 18 is actual, 19 through 27 is projected. And our total elementary declines by 581 students. That's 4.85%. North of the river, we see it declining by 77 students and 1.41%. Now, does that mean every school declines? No. But overall, we see a decline. South of the river, we see a decline over the next 9 years of 500 students, which is 7.73%. Again, is that all the schools? No. Because when you look at the schools south of the river, there's a swath that runs right along the James River of schools that we see the declining enrollment. But when you look further south, Oak Grove, Broad Rock, Green, Francis, Miles Jones, Reed, Red, you see those numbers going up. And we see a change in our demographics. We're going from predominantly African American schools to now large Hispanic student populations, which brings up unique challenges for our district. All of a sudden, we have Spanish-speaking parents coming into our schools, and our staff is not trained to deal with the Spanish-speaking parent. And then all of a sudden, we see the discrimination word get used greater because they don't feel, our Hispanic parents don't feel welcome, don't feel like we can provide those services. All of which is driving and changing the needs of this district going forward, not just from a budget, a building standpoint, but also from a budgetary standpoint. Middle school, we're seeing their numbers go up 346, which is an 8% growth over the next 9 years. North of the river, we see an increase of 55, 2.8%. South, we see a 291 student gain, which is almost a 13% growth rate. High school, we see us going up 334 students. A decrease of 68 north, which is 2.8. In south, we see a growth of 402 students, which is almost a 16% growth over the next 9 years. Specialty schools. So as we start talking about MPCs are in specialty schools. Community, Franklin. Why? Because the community made decisions to have small classes. So if you went to Franklin today, there's 375 students in their building. The building can hold 700 plus. But their school is using all 34 classrooms today because they made a choice to have smaller class size to meet with the program that Franklin wants to serve. Communities in the identical building as Franklin, they only have 275 students in the building. It sounds like you could put a lot of capacity there tomorrow. However, they use 19 of those 34 classrooms for their academic program. You see where the challenges are? So when we looked at this, we took all those considerations, and here was the plan that we did it in 4 phases, presented it to our board, and then asked our board to actually adopt phase 1. Because phase 2, 3, and 4, we said you're going to go, it's a living document. The enrollment's a living document, the facilities plan's a living document, and so in time you'll have to look at 2, 3, and 4 at the appropriate time and make those decisions, and you may reshuffle the deck, as I call it, amongst the schools. But we propose constructing a new 1,000 student school to replace the existing green. You'll say, well, it's greater than 700. Yes, it is. But we can't make any of the schools work from a rezoning capacity south of the river. Broad Rock and Green today have 43 modular classrooms on their campus and 2 modular dining rooms. Think about that. Every day, no matter what the weather conditions are, rain, snow, ice, we move food from the kitchens of those schools in the weather to a dining room located somewhere else on that campus. We've done that for 2 years. Those 43 classrooms, that's about 860 students. When we construct the new school, we will rezone Broad Rock and Green and think that that will meet our needs. However, remember I said, it's a living, breathing document. What happens if enrollment continues to go up? It goes up faster than we're projecting, which we've seen. 2 years ago, Miles Jones, we saw an increase of 25 students, and we measured everything on September 30th. On January 1st to the end of April, we saw another 70 students enroll at Miles Jones, and we had no plan for it. We ended up having to put 8 modular classrooms at Miles Jones to address those needs. Everybody looked at it and said, wait, numbers are going to go up the following year. We went up 10 students. That's where this thing's an inexact science. It's a breathing document. But if we don't have enough room at Broad Rock and Green, we also have Reed and Francis to meet our needs. Construct a new 1,500 student middle school to replace the existing L. Park Thompson. We'll talk about the second George Mason. George Mason is building with a lot of environmental issues. However, there's a lot of buildings in this district that are equal to George Mason. Elkhart Thompson is one of those buildings. Rezone Thompson, Brown, Bouchard, Elkhart when we build the new school. Construct the new George Will. Now, option 5, as we call it, based on the 1415 report, the Green and Elkhart Thompson were there. George Will wasn't in phase 1, it was in phase 2. But George Will, of every school in the district, if you look at the projections, its enrollment does this. Others grow and then flatten out toward the end of the projected cycle, and we start seeing a little decline. George Will, we see nothing but growth. We proposed, there's about 250 students who live south of the James, whose students go to Blackwell Elementary per middle, they go to Elkhart Thompson for middle school. They then go to Armstrong. So guess what happens at Armstrong when we do this? We have 6 housing developments going to one high school. So we're proposing to move those students that are south back to their zone high school, which would be George Will. Construct the new George Mason. Construct the new Woodville. Both of those will be 600 to 650 student capacity, right in that range. Complete some of the FF&E and technology, what we're doing at Overby, just finish out and buy new furniture. That's really the only thing that we haven't done. Begin work on a major renovation of Fairfield and do a major renovation of Francis. Francis is identical to Overby. It doesn't have walls. It's that open concept store. And so as its growth is taking place, it right now needs those walls. And so this would give them the same setup as we have elsewhere. Revisit the plan on an annual basis, because it's a living document. We talked about what will happen in phases 2, 3, and 4. The board will look at each of those, and as I say, reshuffle the deck. Projected cash in phase 1 is $224.8 million. And then phase 2, 3, in timing will be everything because we've built an inflation factor in there, but you see overall the total of the dollars is about $800 million. Now, if you looked at option 5 and you factor in the 10% growth, you factor in the pre-K centers and the Amelia Street, which when we talk about option 5 strictly was just K-5, K-12. Their numbers in Plan B, which had some as a discussion with the board, was fairly close. They were within $10 million. This plan, as we proposed, we're not consolidating any, we're moving students around, we're doing rezoning to better use our assets, but we're not doing any consolidations. We're staying with our community-based schools. Any questions? Oh, Mr. President, can yes. Yes, ma'am.
So, part of the thrust of all the year-and-a-half long work that we did with the facilities task force and the data that was in the file and that over 1,000-page document that was put together, the only way to really dig ourselves out of this is through consolidation. That was one of the primary.
That was the main consideration back in 1454.
So what's changed? Why can't we consolidate now?
You don't have as many options. George Will, the needs are changing. With moving,
I'm primarily talking about at the lower levels. I mean, we've got schools within blocks of each other that we're contemplating new construction or complete renovation.
I think it gets down to one consideration is the state MOU with the student chief. There's a feeling that we need to stay small to try to address some of, this, in order, and let's face it, our student achievement is not just books and the academic side. We also have that culture and crime. inside our schools.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but let's face it, those small schools have been failing kids for decades. And if we're spending money on facilities and not instruction, then we're going, again, in the wrong direction. If we can consolidate, find efficiencies, and put more money in instruction, we're serving those students better than giving them a community-based school that is keeping them impoverished and illiterate.
But when you start building, and remember, under option 5, because we looked hard at this, and we did the same thing with this one. Because there are a number of empty seats, we all say that you can rezone your way out of it, and you can't. Okay? I know you and I agree. So you end up getting into the construction program, which you may spend fewer dollars construction-wise, but your square footage is going to change dramatically. Okay? The only way we're going to change our square footage dramatically is if we do something with Henderson Miller. We do something with the 3 high schools north of the river. Because honestly, we don't have the growth there. And then also, what do we do with those specialty schools? I mean, that's generally where our open seats are. When you look at, our elementary schools, we have pockets of 50 open seats or 100 open seats. We have pockets, but you don't have a school that sits with more than 100 open seats.
But that's current day, and if you match up the city's capital plan and the deconcentration and how Creighton Court and the Woodland Court are supposed to come offline, you're going to see a much faster decline in student populations in those areas.
We should. But
Not staying open for consolidation to me makes it drag out longer, less children will see 21st century learning environment. And I think it's unfair to the rest of the population if we're not moving forward in the most efficient way possible.
But speaking about Wickham and Creighton and those developments, it's difficult for us to predict what impact they will have on schools. So if you took and if we built a 1,000-student school in an area, and then we find out that the enrollment declined 250 students because of the development and how their projects work, then we've overbuilt. And we've tried not to overbuild, both in option 5 and where we are today.
And I know we probably spent too much time together on this school, but we contemplated K-8 programming, we contemplated other more innovative approaches to addressing the needs of those populations in a way that we're not overbuilding. We are addressing the activities. This just is a status quo plan, other than we're okay cramming Hispanic kids into a larger setting, but we're not going to do that in the East End. So I mean,
But you're going to get to option 5. If you recall, we basically blew up the whole district. And as soon as the discussion went to a high school setting, and you heard me say this in community meetings, the minute you take one school off the table, the minute you take one, you take them off. Because every school has history, every school's got everything about it. And honestly, that's one of the things that derailed, in my opinion, option 5, is that when we had the discussion about a high school, it took that whole conversation off. The other thing that's different, though,
we can't make decisions in emotion. We have to let the data, the information drive that decision.
and I think, and that's where I was going, I think today it's different, though, than when option 5 was here. And really, I do think this is different. That MOU with the state is huge. I mean, that MOU is significant. because that MOU was generated because as a district, we weren't hitting the mark academically. It had nothing, and while facilities are mentioned, and while HR is mentioned, and all the departments are mentioned, when you really drill down to the bottom line of that document, it's about academics. And there's a lot of people on our board today who, you know, I've not been in the classroom. I'm not the academic side. I can do the facilities, I can do the operations side. But there's a real belief that having that community-based, smaller school setting will generate better student achievement than the larger school setting.
What does the data show us? I mean.
When I go and research it, there's data for small schools and there's data for large schools.
Mr. Krantz,
But that's not for me to answer. I'm a facility person, not that.
at the beginning of your, the dialogue with Ms. Gray, you talked about the 1,000-student facility and the growth patterns, how that might not be, wouldn't be feasible if a changing, neighborhoods change over time.
Right, particularly
So-
East End.
Walk me through, though, the notion behind building two 500-student facilities in an area when we have 1,000, when you've taken 1,000-student facility off the table, because it costs more money to build two schools in terms of one. And my second question is, the current plan presented, does it get the most amount of students to a high-performing state-of-the-art facility the quickest? And this is from a practitioner point of view, not...
Honestly, between option 5 and this plan, percentage-wise, it's about probably the same. Okay, because when we develop all these plans, we have an idea about debt and debt capacity. I mean, you know, I put my CPA hat and CFO's hats on that I've done all throughout my career.
But in this plan, though, which students in the district have to wait longer to get to a state-of-the-art, high-performing school? This is an equity question.
Probably more toward the west end. We're addressing the east end and we're addressing south sooner. But that's where our growth is. You know, where we see east, where a lot of our older schools generally are.
But tell me about students over at the east end in terms like Woodville. Would those students get an opportunity to be in a high-performing state-of-the-art school? When do they get to Ohio? When do they get there?
Woodville, we're proposing a new school that would start in year 3 of phase 1. It's a 5-year plan. So Woodville would be in their new school to start in year 5 in the plan. George Mason would be in a new school in year 3 of the plan. But you got 24 months, first year design, second year construction, third year you're open.
And are there strategies to get those students all the students in East End to a school in a quicker time frame?
Yes, sir, because we're not, in the first batch in phase 1, we're not addressing Chimborazo or Bellevue. Okay, so those would be your East End. Also, when you go north, elementary-wise, it's not Stewart or Inner Park. Those are later in phases 2 of growth. But you can't do, I don't think, I mean, even if you gave us, even if the city could give the check to the school system of $800 million today, okay? You can't construct all this in 5 years. It's just not possible. So it's an aggressive plan that we've got out there now saying year 1, we would start with a new green, we'd begin design work on green, Elkhart Thompson, George Mason, George Wick. Year 2, you got construction going. In the case of George Mason and Green, you'd be moving in year 3, you'd open at the start of year 3. In the case of an Elkhart Thompson, you're opening in the case of the start of year 4. A George Wick, you're moving in probably the start of year 5, because it's a high school, it takes that much longer from the construction. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat, but well, we can talk off.
Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
So, and I'm still getting a lot of calls, but we fully renovated MLK. We're still seeing dismal SOL results, 1% pass rate, I mean, single-digit pass rates on math, science, reading. So how is building new, renovating these schools without some innovation and creativity into the programming going to fix things? And to that, even, I know we talked about K on the south side for the English language learning populations as well. We looked at other things that are working statistically in other districts much better. Middle schools where we lose a lot of our students. They drop off. So why aren't we looking at a different approach to that middle school?
Let's take the K-8 model. So the K-8 model south of the river, it would require at a minimum 2 new schools there. At a minimum. And honestly, we don't have the plan.
Well, we have plans drawn up for some K-8 for.
We did a rough plan for a Green that we could drop on, but Green's not, a K-8's not large enough to meet the middle school demand that I've got just in Elkhart.
But would that take some of the pressure off?
Off of Wood Building.
Off of Elkhart? I mean, from the Latino and Hispanic students, the calls I get are, they want to go to Brown. They want to be out of Blue Shaw. They want to be out of Elkhart Thompson. Those are the calls I get. I just got one. The students who are really trying are having a hard time
But a K-8 Green wouldn't address the shop.
hearing in the classroom. But will it take some of the pressure off? And
No, not on Blue Shaw, because Elkhart zone itself is going so forth.
so what are we doing to try to address some of those concerns? Because bigger at that middle school level, I mean, we're already seeing.
But let's stay on the K-8 with Green. So if we did a K-8 with Green, that would address Green. It wouldn't address Broad Rock. So all of a sudden, Broad Rock was well in excess of 900 students, getting ready to hit 1,000, sitting in modular classroom that doesn't have covered walkways, because it was never intended to be permanent. It was intended to be temporary. So those students change class every day, no matter what the weather was. And if we did a K-8 at Green, it addressed the Elkhart, then we have to find another school to build for Broad Rock.
Well, in Broad Rock being a brand new school where people were told, they were made promises that they were all going to go to a brand new school, so nobody would go to Blackwell. I mean, a lot of the challenges with the crowd in there is politics.
But Blackwell, on a functional basis right now, has 75 empty seats.
But we looked at
And Oak Grove-
rezoning and taking some of the,
Right.
we were shifting 250 kids.
That was our initial plan.
So, I don't know, I don't see what has changed so drastically that,
Oak Grove is projected to stay right at 670. It's now at 725. I mean, we believe you're going to end up having to rezone. As you do construction, you're going to rezone every school. As you do your construction.
Ms. Dory, you have?
All right, we kind of are getting into specifics now, so. I was going to respond to Ms. Gray's question about the research and just say I agree with Ms. Gray that there's a balance, right? We have money to spend on facilities, we also have money to spend on instruction. And I think one thing that I don't know if we as a collective group have decided is where's our priority. To me, voting for or supporting phase 1 means we're prioritizing our dollars and facilities. And I just don't know if that's exact. I mean, I definitely think we need to get kids into safe schools as quickly as possible, for sure. We can all agree on that. But the research that I've done has shown that yes, certain facility sizes are good for academic achievement. Between 600 and 900 students is kind of roughly the average, but really the number one driver of academic success is classroom size, which is a facilities factor, but it's also a teacher factor. So I just think we need to think, I'm glad that we're pushing ourselves to think a little more broadly about where we want to prioritize our dollars.
And Liz, that's where I've been trying to interject too. I mean, the mayor mentions equity. Well, you have a 5th grade class with 25 kids in it, and you have a 4th grade class with 11 kids in it. Where's that equity, even within the same school? That's not an equitable teacher-student ratio, and it's the same population, it's the same neighborhood, and the child's ability to learn and the attention and the effort that is provided to them at 25 to 1 versus 11 to 1 is dramatically different. And I think that's something that, as far as I'm aware, is not in the superintendent's ability and it's not in the school board's ability. That is the principal's ability to dictate how resources are utilized in their own schools. That's my understanding of the process. So, you know, when you say, well, we're going to fund it, when you talk about the people who fund it, we're so far removed from the decisions that actually get made, and yet we're led to believe it's going to be this way. And then you get parents who are complaining that it's not this way. And so I think you have to come up with some balance here in order to instill the expectations, not just of the governing body who's being asked to fund it, but also within the community. And I've said it a couple of times since I've been on city council. For me, it's always about the classroom instruction and trying to get the resources to the child to improve their education. And people have suffered in worse conditions to get a better education because it's about the education. And I think that that's unfortunate, but that's where we have to prioritize. That's going to have the longest impact. And frankly, from the MOU that I hear from the state, that's the only thing that's going to address the MOU.
Student two.
The question I had, Mr. Krantz, is just solely about the plan that's at hand, whether or not it addresses equity or not, because the Bellwether report states that per pupil cost at Swansboro is almost 2 times higher than at Broad Rock, which is over 3 times larger. Is that those numbers still correct? And per pupil cost at Red is 30% higher than at Broad Rock, which is 2 times the size. Per pupil cost at Bedford is 1.5 higher than at Elkhart Thompson, which is over 3 times the size. And then per pupil cost at TJ is 1.3 higher than at Huguenot, which is 2 times larger. So does the plan presented level the playing field on those costs?
Somewhat. Because you remember I said at the beginning, and this gets into the real discussion, that as you talk about facilities, is the programs that are in building. A TJ that's running an IB program has program needs that are different than at a Huguenot. So I'm not comparing true apples and apples. The same thing at Bedford. In Bedford, we said we were leaning in option 5 to low Bedford. Bedford's enrollment was well below 200 students. And the growth in their zone was 0. We were seeing a decline. And the students that are going to, and we can discuss this at the next meeting, because we call it leveling, where when you look at what I call the leveling, where a zone school, okay, say a Fox, over 20% of Fox enrollment, Mumford's enrollment, Holton's enrollment, all comes from out of zone. We're moving students from the East End to these schools. Same thing with TJ. We're moving students, the biggest group of students outside of TJ's zone comes from the East End. Same thing with Albert Hill. The largest percentage of students that go to Albert Hill out of zone come from the East End. Our students really do move, and move substantially. And you're right, when the statement was about middle school, if you took and did a scatter graph of, say, Holton, Fox, and Mumford, of all the fifth graders, you see lots of dots where they live. But if you took Brook Road and went to the west and look at just the sixth grade enrollment today and did a scatter graph, you'll see hardly any dots. That's where we see our drop-off, is in that. Then we get into the discussion about let's do KA. Well, I must focus just on the west end. So Holton is a school that has land that you could build a KA. You could add to Holton. Mumford, you could do some addition. Fox, you can't do any addition. Fox is landlocked. There's nowhere to go. Albert Hill is not a school that would be easy to add on to. Now, if we go up above the parking lots, but now you're talking about costs that are going to be astronomical. So we looked at KAs. And all your questions are valid. Everybody's questions are very valid. Facility-wise, when you construct a 1,000-student school, it's cheaper than constructing 500 students. There's no doubt about it, because the number of classrooms will be the same, but I'm not constructing 2 kitchens, I'm not constructing 2 offices, I'm not constructing 2 media centers. You're not constructing 2 gyms. That's where you're saving your construction.
And operation.
Your operations is a function of your square footage. That's where your operation costs. You're going to eliminate some staffing, but, and we've said, in elementary school, you may be able to achieve $500,000, in middle school, you may be able to achieve $750,000. But then, with the student achievement issues we're having to face, with the changing demographics, with where our needs are, I think you wouldn't see a whole lot of savings, because there's needs academically. In just the short time I've been in the interim city, there's some real needs academically that I think any savings would be immediately going back into the classroom. Ms. Gibson?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about our public schools, we're often talking about the efficiency of our school system. And every time there's an article about budget, there's always someone in the comments who points out to that our schools, the average cost per student is $13,000 versus the counties where it's $9,000. And so, but I think it's really important that we continue to remind ourselves why that is. Ultimately, our school system was founded on segregation, and segregation is anything but efficient. So we have a landscape of small schools. Some were white schools, some were black schools. And we've created communities around those schools. And so now I think it is our responsibility as elected officials to make each of those communities thrive. And so we have a plan on the table. And what we also have is the city made a statement in November, right? We want to make change. We want to put the schools first. That's essentially what came out of the ballot box in the referendum. And so we've had plans again and again and again, and nothing's happened with those plans. And so now what we have is we've got a fund plan. And I really think we need to focus this conversation on funding. I'd like to see the funding come quickly, because I think if we really want to do what those voters asked us to do, we're going to ensure that in the fall, when we're going to have a new class of kindergartners and preschoolers enter the schools, what we need to deliver to them is ensure that over the course of their tenure in the schools, that they will be in a new building, in a modern building. And so we need to look at what we can do to expedite addressing the needs in our schools over that time frame. But unless we start to change and really focus the conversation on the funding, which is where we started here, nothing will change.
Let me make one statement though, because I keep hearing the comparison between our cost of $13,000 and everybody else. The $13,000 includes state and federal funding. Those aren't available for operations. That's against federal law. You can't supplant the requirements of, everybody has to have an equal share of GP funds. So I can't use title funds for maintenance and repair. It's not allowed. Because we don't do, if we funded everybody equally, maybe you could. I still don't think you could. But that's the thing to keep in mind. The $13,000 includes federal, and that's a big difference when you compare it to Hanover, Henrico, and Chesterfield. That's the largest part of the difference between our numbers.
And Mr. Kress, I'll add that to Ms. Gibson's point that I think everybody here understands we have to do something. But I think what we want to avoid is, we want to avoid the creation of the construction of schools like Oak Grove and Brown Rock, which opened on day one, particularly Brown Rock, opened on day one of the crowd. How can we go about avoiding that? And is this the plan that will avoid that moving forward? Ms. Gray.
So.
Ms. Gray, then Mr. Young, and then Mr. Jones.
Sorry. And just in response to what we've talked about as far as the legacy of segregation, I don't think that new construction leads to better integrated schools. If we look at Martin Luther King, for example, as you see the East End become more and more diverse, that school is not becoming more diverse. They have a brand new building, new facility, and it is not being utilized by everyone living in the area who feeds that school. So, you know, we can talk about funding plans, but if they're not efficient, if they're not innovative, and they're not drawing families in, we're going to be right back into funding a legacy of poverty, segregation, and poor schools, poor performing schools, poor neighborhoods, and poor jobs, which cycles you back into those poor neighborhoods and poor schools. So we've got to think beyond bricks and mortar, and we've got to think about how we bring diverse communities into the schools if we're going there.
I think you got to do both. I think you got to do, it's a comprehensive one.
Mr. Young?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've been encouraged by the conversation today, and I was eagerly anticipating, almost anxious for the opportunity for the two bodies along with the mayor's office to get together for the purpose of this conversation, because I think it's, to be rather blunt, overdue. I would heard a lot that I would concur with. A moment ago, my colleague at the store and our friend on the council, Ms. Gray, spoke to the plan that was adopted. And I would encourage my colleagues to revisit the plan. I think it should be done sooner rather than later. Ms. Gray critiqued it. I would probably go a step further and suggest that the plan that was adopted constitutes a prioritization of the status quo. As it relates to segregation, I think that what my new colleague from the third said was correct, at least the first part of it. I think that Richmond Public Schools, like our city as a whole, still regrettably has to bear that stain. It will for some time, but unfortunately we're changing fast. But I would encourage everyone in this town to remember that in the same way we build housing projects to put certain people with certain socioeconomics in certain places, we often did the same thing in schools. And candidly, from my perspective, though I suspect that people could disagree, it's why I get excited about larger schools, larger campuses at least, because it's an opportunity for us to integrate. It's an opportunity for us to introduce a new world of persons who regrettably sometimes don't know anything more within about a 10-block radius. There is a lot more that I wanted to say, but in the interest of time, I want to be respectful of those persons that have spoken.
Mr. Jones?
Yes, I just want to applaud everyone for open dialogue that's taking place. I think it's positive, it's beneficial. My concern representing my district is hearing the 1,000 student population in elementary, knowing that Broadmoor is already there. And again, regardless of the size of the total population, my concern is what is going to be the classroom sizes within these entities. And again, we talk about segregation and all these other things. That's fine. You know, we can look at some of the real things that are happening. Schools that are underperforming are in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods. And are we introducing policies, plans, and procedures that are going to educate these children? Green Elementary, and help me with the numbers, it is predominantly Latino. And so we're going to continue to grow that school. Are we going to make sure that they have the resources that they need to ensure for the families that are ESL that they can succeed? And again, I'm just taken back by the numbers. 1,000 students in elementary school. What are the class sizes going to be? And Ms. Grants, we talked about this, the number of long-term subs in schools on the south side versus permanent teachers, how that equates to some of the other schools. I don't want to make this a north-south issue. I don't want to make it an open Maggie Walker type discussion, but again, you know, what resources are being expended at the governor's school, what type of resources are being expended at open to make sure that we have some of the same resources. And combine those schools. Combine them and let's see what the public outrage is. And, you know, we talk about the Armstrongs and, you know, the legacy of Armstrong, the legacy of the old dragons from Maggie L. Walker. But start combining some of those schools and see what the impact is. But again, 1,000 students at Green Elementary, that causes great heartburn on my end. And I would love to see the plan on how we're going to do education on a day-to-day basis. Mr. Mayor, to your point, how do we get them into the facility? How do we begin teaching and instructing them differently than the way they're being instructed now? Because if that doesn't change, test scores aren't change. We can flip buildings all day long.
So to answer part of your question, from a capacity standpoint, just a straight facility, and this is going to take time to hit this mark. You look, we're saying that the maximum capacity in 4-6 is 22 students to every one teacher. And then we're at 90%, between 85 and 90% of that number. That's when we talk about capacity of a building, that's what we're saying. Now, if that's what's true today, it's a work in process, because you're not going to change it overnight. Last year, at Francis, their 4th grade class, I had 28 students in a classroom. 2 students sat in the doorway, because the classroom wasn't built for that size. In an open air concept, which made it really interesting. Now, the state said I could go to 35 and 1 for that same size classroom. So this is how, from a facility standpoint, we answer your question of keeping it. The other thing that we've seen in just my short time in the interim, and Jason's not here, but in the high schools, and there's a lot of educators, and Ms. Burke, that support, change what if I may say this wrong from an educator standpoint. But in high schools, the challenge becomes is how are we going to offer all these electives? Okay? But our core classes, we need to stay at 85 to 90% of 22 to 1, and not have core classes at 25 and 30 to 1, and then electives sitting at 5 or 10. Okay? That honestly becomes the key, is holding the academic side hard on that number. You know, we want a certain ratio overall, blended, and that from a core perspective, we're not going to exceed. And to me, now I'm talking as a parent and a business owner who hire these high school students to come to work for them. I need them to be, math and science and reading and social studies. Those are the core stuff. That's the core knowledge I need them to know when they come into the employment world. I think you accomplish that with smaller class sizes. So keeping this hard at that 85 to 90% of 22, that's the way you accomplish it.
And my question is, this is total RPS. So what about when you begin looking at some of our underperforming schools?
So I've been keeping track of, I got Dr. Newbill, Mr. Barlow, Dr. Sapini, because everybody's going to talk about I just want everybody to be aware it's 11:30.
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone that Mr. Crandall will have a full discussion at a later joint meeting.
So I just want to remind you of that. So Dr. Newbill,
And I
Dr. So you agree with that?
You're
okay.
sorry, I can't have everyone, but we remind everyone that.
He's accessible. That's what he's trying to say.
And just to add, I asked Mr. Prince if he could provide the city council with some of the key documents in this plan, just so.
That'd be great.
I was going where Dr. Sapini is going, and pretty much to say this is a quarterly meeting that we are in at this moment, and it's important that we get the major questions, because when we go into the Education Compact Team meeting, we need these questions. That's what I'm looking for, to drill down this document, looking at the formulas, the numbers that underlie all of this in terms of this particular proposal that's come forth. And for me, it's not either or. We're talking pupils at the center of this workforce, pupils, parents. The cluster is secondary, but it is part and parcel of the discussions, the professionals, the administrative staff, the academic staff, all of that's a part of this, the programming. And so it is my expectation, I'm looking towards you, that, because I'm wanting to ensure it is my expectation that we're dealing with facilities, the funding thereof, these kind of questions. We're going to deal with the programmatic side of things, the academics, all of that is part and parcel of this discussion. Cross-sector funding for this strategy, as well as, again, the various types of formulas and decisioning that went into this particular facilities plan, and being able to drill down even more. So that's why I'm looking for the more intense work, but I think it's critical at these meetings that we do get this, so we're taking those to the table, as well as the representatives receiving any additional questions to bring to that table, so the next quarter we figure out these kinds of questions can be addressed.
And as you get into the detail, I would encourage you, these will take days. I mean, this took months, working most days anywhere from 12 to 20 hours in a day. Okay, so just keep that in mind when we get into the details, which I'm glad to go through.
But that's the kind of drill
But
down
you need those hours, you need to allocate those hours.
Yes, and I'm prepared to do that. That's the kind of drill down and commitment I think we've all made to our children, to public educators, and all of those components. So I hear you, but I'm saying that's what's going to be.
That's fine.
And we need to be prepared to do that.
Mr. Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with a lot of what Mr. Newbill said. There's absolutely a need for us to continue to drill down and explore options. I do think it's incumbent upon us to remember that the public is the manager of under facilities plan. We certainly need to figure out how to ensure that we can modernize all of our schools based on the two plans that we've seen early on. 20 years seems too long for me to wait. So I encourage more discussion about how we can do this in an expedited manner. And I think we all understand that in order to do that, it's going to require a lot of funding. So I'm glad that we're at a point where we've laid down our top early priorities for phase one. And I think many of us agree that those are schools that we need to get to work on. But I do encourage the compact team and council and the mayor to really be looking into the funding piece. And remember that the school board is the entity that is responsible for ultimately approving the final plan. We're certainly eager to see input, but that we're the ones who are closest to the students. It's our responsibility to put that plan together, and we are looking forward to collaborating to find all the funding that we need to do it.
Mr. Addison.
Thank you for this lively discussion. I think this is valuable, having multiple sides talking about what's, I think, one of the most pressing issues we have to deal with. It's not just institutional education, it's the facilities in which that they are able to do that. One of the things that I've heard that several of my colleagues from both sides of school board and city council mentioned, and I also believe is need is to look at, we're growing as a city, and we're growing north, side, east, west. And with that growth comes the future need of looking at how we're going to have an adaptive, adoptable plan that's adaptive to changing with our city. I've heard stories about facilities being built under capacity before they even open doors. I hear needs of discussions happening from previous school board discussions about the same exact issue, where redistricting, consolidation, and other changes to be innovative is a word you can use. I just think it's being modern and taking a good approach to making sure you're putting all your cards in front of you before you make a decision. And I want to make sure that the plan you're going to present for us on city council to fund accounts for all of those needs. And for me right now, I'm not sure we're there yet. And I think that this conversation in this room allows me to say this in a way that I want to be collaborative in working together, addressing those needs. Is any plan perfect? No. I don't expect that. But we have to work together and continue this dialogue. And I want to make sure that those plans, I see how they can and cannot work. What plans in which those types of discussions are either being made or being told that they're not feasible, so that I know that what we're seeing is the right decision to move forward with. Not that this is not that decision, but I feel like there's some questions that are yet to be addressed fully to understand that. For one, you have these ratios on this board right here. I know that for the schools in the first district, we're over some of those functional averages, which means that average to be accurate, which I trust it is, that there's schools that are under that.
That's why we closed open enrollment in your district.
And I fully understand that, and I've heard a lot of stories and understanding of that. But in that understanding, there are schools where I see that that is under that average. And how we're making sure that we're looking at what's the future of our city's growth look like to support that. You mentioned Hispanic growth. That's a growing trend in the south side of our city. We have that going to happen as we look at, the RHA plans for looking at, redevelopment and putting in affordable housing throughout the rest of the city. In those challenges, in those opportunities, we are faced with a decision of looking at how we're funding where those children go to school and making sure that the schools are moving them into new districts have the capacity to take them. And one of the things I want to make sure we look at is how we're doing this holistically to make sure we're doing that together. And so, while I'm not saying we're directly pushing back on the plan or saying no, I just want to make sure that these questions are being answered as part of what we're receiving, as part of what we're looking at to do together. It's part of the spirit of this compact, and I just want to make sure I support that spirit and just encourage us to have those discussions together. Thank you.
Ms. Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize, I'm getting here, so I'm sure a lot of the conversation has been had. Some of the questions that I had have already been answered. But I too want to celebrate this opportunity for us to come together and have these kinds of discussions, and that we continue to put the time that is necessary to have the robust conversation that is necessary to make sure we make the right investment as it relates to size of facilities, and equally as important as we talk about classroom sizes and making sure that the funding that is needed based on the needs of the children is addressed. I too find it very interesting and would like to know if there is a graph that is available that shows us how many students in our schools that are out of school zone and where those students are coming from and where they're going. Because as we talk about certain sectors of the city that is not growing, we need to be able to appreciate what is the level of student capacity in those zones if there were no students that were migrating in from other sectors of the city.
Yeah, we need that schedule over here.
Okay, I'd love to look at that schedule because I think that's very important when we start looking at growth patterns in the city and where we really need the capacity at. I think there's some policy decisions that I'd also like to see us make. Based on the needs of students, these classroom sizes determine what is a class size based on the student population that we are addressing. I also think that there needs to be a policy decision as it relates to when those students have the opportunity to go to schools outside of their zone as to whether or not those fundings are supported with those students to those other school zones. I also think that, you know, when we make these policy decisions, if we go to a larger school or we stay to a smaller school, that we have those indicators that help us make those policy decisions, so that as we continue to have this conversation, it's that we have determined some policy guidelines of how we make decisions, which will make it possible for us to make revisions and changes to those decisions based on the outcomes of achieving the results that we want. At the end of the day, you know, if our children are not getting the quality of education that they need, then we're not successful in accomplishing the objective that was at hand. And so I look forward to continue to have those conversations and setting the parameters so that we can make policy based on the indicators that we are striving to achieve.
Ms. Graves and Mr. Hill will wrap us up. Ms. Burke?
Thank you so much. I too have enjoyed being here this morning, and the opportunity to have this conversation is most important because we're thinking about our children. Until we address the whole child, which is written in the compact, we'll be sitting here as someone else 20 years from now stating the same. Over my 38 years in Richmond Public Schools, similar conversations in similar or different settings. I think this is the first to have with the mayor. I commend you for that. We must be mindful of three things when we speak of schools in my district, East End, of which I know what we can do and will do. That number one, is going to take a village. It's going to take the churches, it's going to take the businesses, it's going to take, most importantly, those parents and guardians. And until they too have an opportunity to be, especially our parents, have an opportunity to be lifted up. So we can build brand new schools, which are so desperately needed. I'm just devastated when I see certain things because it's not fair. But when we have children that come to us at preschool level, and that's where it all starts. It starts at preschool. When we have children that start at preschool level, then we move them on to, let's say, a neighborhood school where we have 5.5 different housing developments that are there. They have to leave the school at some point. So we have the neighborhood issues spill into the schools. That's the point I'm trying to make. Whatever's going on in the neighborhoods, be it positive or negative, it comes back to the schools. As great as we think we are as educators and persons making the decisions, there are some things we can't control right there in their homes. So at some point, until there's an opportunity to address the whole child, that is inclusive of the community and the parents. And my second thought is, think back to Overby Shepherd, having been built, J.R. Francis, Henderson, and what am I missing? Is that it? 3 open schools? Right. That was a trend in the 80s that never worked in the city of Richmond. I worked at Overby Shepherd. What works for some doesn't work for all. All the SOLs in the world, there's still certain skills that many of our children don't have the opportunity to have taught, which means soft skills, which means that it's upon us through programs such as Community of Caring and similar to teach those as well. So my point is, as we build a new building or an old building, or as Ms. Grace stated, the ML King piece, there's so many issues that fall into that school. And I agree with her totally, because that's some of my former students. But there's so many issues that are brought into that school from the neighborhoods, and that's why children choose to go to the West End or the South Side, because it's too much. It's too much. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So what I'm trying to say is, at some point, the whole child. And that's everything from health care to food. That's a Ziegler-Comer model out of Yale University, which I studied. Thank you.
Ms. Gray and Ms. Miller.
Just I'm just responding slightly to what my counterpart, Mr. Barlow, was saying about the responsibility of the school board. The responsibility, I believe, and having served in both roles that we have from the city council is to be responsible stewards of taxpayer dollars. So we will be looking for a very efficient plan coming forward that's going to address the needs of as many students as quickly as possible. The other point to be made is, and I know Tommy was sick of Kristen and me with that facilities task force, but that was a 1.5-year long process of very open public meetings. We had over 40 community members. We broke into groups. We met openly, publicly for a 1.5 years. And then after we devised several options and plans, those plans were presented where we provided transportation for families who didn't necessarily have access. We had 2 meetings in every single district of the city. We had 18 meetings to vet those plans before we even voted on option 5. And I think that having a plan move forward that has the public support and input is critical to making sure that it's a success. And I don't know that the current plan has had that proper vetting, but I would hope that there would be some reconsideration and community input to and feedback for that plan to move forward. So just those 2 points about the process and making sure that it is ultimately transparent and that it involves the families that we are making these decisions around, and that it's efficient and that it impacts as many students as possible as quickly as possible.
Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess, first of all, here, Mr. Granger, we're talking about, and I believe that the whole open concept, thank God, I was in 5th grade when they built one of those where I came from, so I'm glad I missed that experience. Are we looking at taking all those buildings offline?
Renovating, put walls up, just like we're doing at Oakland.
Okay, all right, and Henderson would be?
Henderson and French are the 2.
All right.
As Burke said, there was 3 open. We were ready to reopen in 2 weeks, and then Henderson and French was sort of during the renovation.
Are we looking at renovating existing buildings that are privately owned? They could be retrofitted into a school?
No, sir. At this point, we're not looking at any privately owned buildings at this point.
Is that something that could be looked at?
Yes, sir. I mean, we could. I mean, just, if we talk about some buildings, I don't have any of them right now on my radar, but yes, sir. We're not saying I know all of them, but yes, sir, it could be something to look at.
All right, and we do have, I guess, schools here, this may be unpopular, but most of them, in, well, I'll say half of them, where you have a vibrant neighborhood that is growing, such as Battery Park. You've got Norwell and Norwell Annex sitting there in the middle of a residential neighborhood, particularly the Annex. And you've got a neighborhood that's on fire from a resident, from a increasing real estate values of people that want to live in that neighborhood. Why? And I've got a couple of others in mind. Open, for instance, it's right there. They don't have a cafeteria. They're right there. Again, Morgan Hill, an extremely desirable neighborhood. I think that Bellevue is a beautiful building. It's right next to Richmond Hill. I think all of these are condo or single-family possibilities. And did we look here or consider that at all?
Well, we've got, they all are taking up the Elk Road. As soon as those roads be done, then we'll be bringing Norwell Annex. Norwell we're using for offices, so we are utilizing that space. Bellevue, yes, sir, that was one, as well as Open. The problem with Open is where do we relocate? Where do we relocate that?
There's also a deed restriction on it that is imposed by the benefactor in this area that doesn't allow for reuse other than public education.
But you are right, there is no cafeteria, there is no gymnasium. So it is one that it just would be where we relocate the students to. Something we had talked since 1430.
And, Mr. Adelanto, that's within, that building was donated, is that what you're saying, by the Aaron's / Lewis Gibson Foundation?
It is for teacher residents.
That could be educationally related. Okay, well, great, thank you for that. Thank everyone for coming out today. I know that schedules of 19 folks are challenging at best to get everyone in the same building. We did throw out this idea of fifth Mondays. I know those are kind of free, and I know everybody looks forward to those fifth Mondays. As a free time, I've got no meetings on the fifth Monday, but there actually is one that falls into every quarter. So I hope we'll seriously consider that and not have to throw out everybody's calendars, because we know that fifth Mondays are actually free for folks. So that's the one.
Yes,
They can be, yes. As I said, one of those falls every quarter. I hope we can move that schedule forward.
Mr. Hill, I hope we can do that as well. I want to thank everybody for coming out today and having this nearly 3-hour discussion about public education. But I think it should not be lost on anyone that for the leaders of this city to come together and talk about the children in the city is it should recognize that is a high standard that has not been met for years and years in the past. And so I think we can leave here thinking that we still have work to do, but I think we all have our priorities in line. We just have to tighten it up. All right? Thank you, everyone.